All right. Okay. So we'll continue to let people in. But in the meantime, let me welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to this March SDXD event. Mixed methods research, what, how, why, and dive in with Zoe Glas, senior UX researcher at Lyft. Thanks so much for being with us. This event is presented by SDXD, San Diego Experience Design Professionals Network. My name is Antonio, I'm the president, and we're a community of over 4,000 practitioners across the world who gather and regularly to connect, inspire, and learn. And shout out to the board. This event is only possible because of them, and it's awesome working with them. So shout out to you guys. And right now, I'll throw it over to ServiceNow. ServiceNow is sponsoring this event, and they're an awesome company. And to talk a bit about ServiceNow, we have the amazing Tara Jensen.
Thank you, Antonio. So ServiceNow is very grateful to host this event, of course. At ServiceNow, we work on enterprise software. We make work better for everyone. So lots of great work here. Our experience organization is like really growing and has been growing for a while. We're to the point where we have over 600 designers, researchers, content writers, and program managers, and we're continuing to grow our team by 30% this year. So we'll be hiring quite a bit. We currently have a variety of open roles for senior and staff level product designers, senior staff user researchers, senior design program management, and we will continue to hire throughout the year. So if you have questions, connect with me and I can tell you more.
Awesome. Yeah, and check out the ServiceNow jobs page. But yeah, thank you, Tara. Thanks again for sponsoring. It's awesome to have you guys. All right. And now to announcements. As always, we have our own Slack channel. There we can discuss about upcoming events, previous events. We also have job postings, and we post the recordings when we do. This event will be recorded and it'll be posted in a couple of days. And another announcement, Adobe is hosting an event next week. My Dream Job Journey in UX and Product Design. It's on March 30th at 5 p.m. And it's live from Adobe Creative Cloud and LinkedIn. And in this event, if you want to stand out while on the job in an internship hunt, especially if you dream of working in UX or product design, you can join Adobe recent grads, Grace Ling, Kate Young, and share how easy it is to create eye-catching vision boards and social assets with Creative Cloud Express. Yeah, so it's hosted by Adobe again, and for the some lucky attendees, you'll be selected for a one-on-one mentoring session with Grace or Kate, and there'll be post-event questions that you can discuss in their Discord channel. We'll post the link in the Zoom chat. And we'll also put a link for the event also in the Zoom chat. And yeah, so that's next March 30th. Okay, and now to the agenda, what we're doing now. So right after this, we'll go right into Zoe's amazing presentation. And from there, we'll do an interactive project planning exercise using a whiteboarding tool called Mural. Don't worry, you don't need an account. We'll share a link and instructions when we get to that part. And after that, if you have time and no pressure, we'll be doing a post-event networking session. So just to chat and get to know each other. Maybe if there's enough people, we'll do breakout rooms. So now let me introduce our featured speaker, Zoe Glas, and we're really excited to have her back. We had an event last year on how to make an impactful resume. And if you want to listen to that talk, it's still on YouTube. It's one of our most watched YouTube videos. We can also add that. And let me tell you a bit about Zoe. Zoe currently leads research for Lyft's new rentals product. She started her UX career at YouTube, and she received a Bachelor of Science from the University of Montana and the Master's of Science from Purdue University. Zoe has been an ardent researcher of human behavior, but has made the zag into UX in the past 4 years. Previously, she focused on conservation behavior, studying things like how religion and living areas affect the willingness to conserve wildlife. And in her spare time, Zoe enjoys mentoring with others looking to make the jump into UX, competitive cycling, which I'm also into, well, more recreative, let's say, and then also hiking with her pet corgi, Fletcher. And without further ado, thanks, Zoe, again, and the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be back with this group and to see a couple familiar faces from last time, or familiar names. Thanks all for being here. As we mentioned today, we're going to be talking a lot about mixed methods research, which is something that we hear about a lot. I think a lot of folks are here right now simply because it feels like that's the thing that everyone's supposed to be doing. But what does that actually mean? So we'll get into it. I'll be honest, we are a Google Hangouts company, as Jade, who's here, knows. So if any of this looks really weird, let me know. So yeah, as you mentioned, I actually used to be a wildlife biologist. Why do I continue to bring that up? I get to mentor a lot of really amazing people, usually over 100 a year, who come and say, I don't know how I'm ever going to break in. I came from something else. If that's selling makeup at Ulta or really closely related fields like consumer marketing insights. I promise there's a space for you in UX if you want one. I am always happy to help with that conversation. I'm on a couple of different mentoring platforms, mainly ADP List. Tons of them out there though, including UX coffee hours. I can help you make that leap. Even if you don't want mentorship, I promise that leap is out there for you. Since then, I've been working as a social scientist and then started my UX career at YouTube, which I used to call a video sharing platform because I thought it was annoying to say I worked at YouTube. But it was a good time, highly recommend. And now I'm at Lyft, and actually I need to update my bio because I am on the rider team now with a little bit bigger of a scope, which has been a great shift in the last couple of months. So if you want to talk Lyft at all, please let me know as well. So a couple of rules of engagement. Please hit me with questions as we go. Talking to the computer as we do all day always gets a little bit weird. I will do my best to keep an eye on the chat. But if I miss something, I'm sure someone from SDXD will also jump in and let me know. But no dumb questions, I promise, especially if there's a clarification. Let's get it out there. Something you disagree with, let's get it out there. If it's totally off topic or it's going to be addressed later, I will let you know. And then we can come back and make sure it was answered. If there's something else going on that you want more feedback, you feel is out of the scope of today, send me an email. My email is there. Glass is spelled with one S, Zoe with nothing extra added to it. I feel a lot of people get, whoever has GLASS gets a lot of my email, and I apologize for that. So let's dive in. So a couple of things we're going to get in today. First, I'm going to give a background of where I'm coming from with this talk. Then we're going to talk about the product development cycle. Why? Because we never do research just because we want to do research. Generally speaking, maybe researchers do that for travel and things, but at least within a company, there has to be a reason and it has to match up with what other people are doing. And I imagine there's also a lot of designers in this room, which is how do you guys work with research and what can you expect from your research partners? Be helpful there. Then we're going to talk about the types of UXR. So we're talking about mixed methods today, but what does that actually mean? If I want to put mixed methods on my resume, what should I be doing? If I want to be qual or quant, is there still space for me? We'll get into all of that. We're also talking about triangulating data and mixed methods themselves. So what makes mixed methods researcher different than everybody else? The methods they use and how they triangulate them together. That'll be kind of the meat of our talk. And then, at least for me, the biggest idea with learning is actually getting to put it into practice. So we're going to do an activity together and we're going to try and work on it out together in small groups. Please stick around for that. I promise it will be fun. It'll be enticing. It'll be engaging. And it'll be a great way to really flex the muscles that we're going to talk about today. And again, as we go, drop in any comments, questions. Okay, so there's three types of research, very, very broadly speaking. Foundational, that's the like, I have no idea what's going on and I really, really want to know more. These are probably some of the most fun but most challenging questions we get to answer. And these are things like, what sucks about travel? How do people view safety with Lyft? How do people want to raise their children? These huge questions are often foundational. They don't necessarily have a specific product that they are going to result in or a specific action, but rather shape how we're thinking about things as a whole. There's also generative research, which is usually that next step of taking like, hey, there's this pain point, there's this background, but now we're going to start to turn it into something. We do a lot of concept testing at that stage, where we're really saying, how do we make this into something that we can monetize, that we can develop, that we can launch? A little bit more tight in scope than foundational, still really fun research. And finally, evaluative. And what does evaluative mean? That generally says this thing exists. It is a prototype. It is relatively high fidelity. It exists in the world. And we want to see how it works in the world. Tends to be pretty small in scope. And when you're starting your career, when you're just starting out, you're going to do a lot of this work. That's the usability testing, really simple concept testing, launch testing, things that are just pretty straightforward. Does it work or does it not work? And what do we need to do to make it work? I want to call out that one of my assumptions here is that design and research are almost always separate roles. It's not always the case. Actually, one of the folks at SDXD looks like they have both titles. It's pretty rare for them to be together. Now, why am I spending a slide on this so early in the talk? I do think there are a bunch of boot camps out there that are setting the expectation that these could be the same role, or that starting out in one of these roles is a great way to get into the other one. It's not necessarily a bad way, but it's not a great way. They have really different things that they're trying to figure out, how they interact with the user, what their ultimate goal is, and how they define success. You will work with each other a lot, and knowing more about one or the other is awesome, but you're very unlikely to be both unless you're in a startup situation, or sometimes managers, because they start to have those bigger teams. Again, there's exceptions, but for the most part, this is the approach. Now, there are certain types of research they might do, but they do tend to be pretty different. Now, what is that difference? UX researchers tend to start a little bit earlier than designers. They're just saying, hey, foundationally, there's something missing. There's something that we need to figure out. Here's something that we need to make better. We then come back together with this ideation stage. What could this be? How do we take this really cool data, pull it apart, make it into something cooler, and decide on next steps? From there, designers are starting to go straight into kind of ideating, concepting, building things to get our brains moving and shaking that eventually could become the product, and then iteratively developing from there. Now, does that mean they get it right in the first try? No, it's all part of the process, but it's a lot of steps to get there. Researchers, on the other hand, are then saying, okay, we've got this space. We've got this space that has blank spots, that has pain points, that has opportunities. How do I then have some ideas of what that could be and how that matches into the business goals? And then what's required to do it? And then finally joining the designers again on that iterative stage. So very, very, very different roles as they go throughout this process. We bounce off of each other. Often designers are sitting in on those research sessions, hearing from the users live, adapting as they go, but they do have really distinct skill sets. As designers, how can we guide that earlier step? Be part of research. So often designers, product people, everyone can jump in and say, hey, this is something I've noticed. And these ideas come from all over. One of the big things you're going to do as a researcher, especially once you get to like mid and senior level, is road mapping, where you say, what am I going to work on in the next year? What am I going to work on in the next half? And you're going to look at everything you could do. And most of those ideas that are coming in, some of them are going to be your own, but are going to come from design, are going to come from product, are going to come from your business leaders that say, I need to know this thing. Designers can always be at that stage. And also just bringing up things that they're seeing, right? Hey, I went through this flow. I don't really know where to take it from here. What do we know about the user's behavior in this way or the other, and can influence where the research is heading? But honestly, the best designers are the ones sitting in on research. They, especially doing iterative research, but at any stage are looking at people's scripts, are looking at what's available, are voicing their opinion, are disagreeing. Please do not be afraid of disagreement. Disagreement is the lifeblood of what we do. If you are not liking data that's coming back, if it's not going the way that you want, you have a huge opportunity to say, this is why I don't think this is right. There's no right and wrong, but you can start to say, okay, what are we missing? What's the layer here that starts to make these data make more and more sense? What are the business rules? Business roles. So one of the things you're going to have, and sorry, so for some people, this is probably going to be a little bit too basic. For some, maybe a little bit too advanced, but anytime you do research, you have something called OKRs, which are the results that we are measured against at the end of the year. Usually these are things like people using the product, conversion, support tickets. They can really be anything. And what we want to be able to say at the end of the year is that we did research, we did design, we changed something, a change came of it. And I can say that my research did that thing. And that's where we call impact, which if you want to go look at that impact presentation, it's a great way. But that could be just getting people to think about things, reducing costs, whatever. And whenever we do research, we always want to be thinking about that. Because if we do the most brilliant, amazing research, but it has nothing to do with what we're building. For example, like let's say Jade is at Lyft with me. So Jade and I got together and we said, you know what needs to be? Heliplanes. That's what we need for skiing. And we spent all this time building out this idea of heliplanes, but there was no intention business-wise of ever doing anything from the skies. That research isn't great. So there's kind of that limit that's always going to be played in of how it actually meets those goals. No, I'm just answering questions as we go, Marcella. And then UXR intersecting with strategy, that is a really big question, but we'll address it a little bit later. KPIs similar to OKRs, just different companies use different metrics. Cool. Let's advance those slides. So the caveat here, because I will say people will be like, no, I'm a designer, I do research. Designers do a lot of evaluative research, and especially as your company grows, there tend to be more designers than researchers. There are some companies that this is more equal. To be honest, I've only heard of a few. I know Chime is one of them, but in general, you're going to have a ratio of like 3-to-1 designers to researchers. Very rarely will you have a 1-to-1. Sometimes happens though, which is to say you're not going to be able to do all the research that you want to do. And the more complicated research, that foundational and generative, researchers kind of have to do. There's a lot of requirements that are beyond anything design would do. However, things like usability testing, very doable. So designers can step in there. If you are a designer who does evaluative research, that's rad. I would still consider you a designer and not a designer/researcher. Why does that matter? Because the recruiter reading resumes and things like that are reading really quickly, and we don't want them to dismiss you or misjudge you based on something too easy. Cool. Great outcomes always happen in the middle though. We should be working with each other absolutely as much as possible. Yell at each other, hug each other, figure out what it works and what doesn't work for you and your teammates. But we're always trying to find the answer. If you're ever disagreeing, chances are there's just something foundationally that you don't understand and what the other is bringing to the table. And you're pushing from different perspectives, which is another reason we always want to get as many people involved in research as possible. Everyone has different perspectives, different view on the business goals, different views on what can be done. The more of those you have at the table, the better. And I fully agree with Chantel, 1-to-1 ratio would be a dream. I do believe Chime might be like 1.5-to-1, they're really close. At many other companies, not the case. I've been as little as 9-to-1. You're just not going to have as much time. Yeah, cool. So in summary, UXR versus UXD. The researcher is really trying to understand motivations and needs. So the UXD then just needs to understand it, right? We're not trying to build out the understanding. You're just trying to say, great, I can now have a better idea of what that person needs and how I can then build for it. Researcher is the one generating those insights. The researcher is really focused on the why, right? Why does this thing work? What mental model is preventing or helping this thing work? What's going on there? And the designer is then going to take those whys and turn them into things. The researcher can direct that. They can say, these are some things that I think are really important to touch on, but the designer is the one kind of making the magic happen, putting it in front of folks. The UXR is always integrating the design constraints, business needs, and user needs into a single cohesive vision, right? If I just come to you and I say the #1 thing YouTube should do for user satisfaction is get rid of ads, that's probably true. YouTube's not going to get rid of ads. It's just not going to happen. It's how they make money, right? So you have to take into account all those other pieces and say, well, what's the middle ground here? What's the piece that we can move forward with? And the designer, again, taking that and turning it into something actionable. The researcher overall, really responsible for the voice of the user. Be in the meetings, be the cheerleader, be the champion that's saying, here's what's going on. The designer is really making it happen and then handing it off to Eng. So the better relationship you have, the more you can monitor that relationship and make sure it's going the way that you want it to be. Cool. So again, rare to be both, possible, but rare. If one path is drawing, if you're at the very beginning of your career and you want to go one way versus the other, go in full-fledged. You can switch later. One of the best researchers I work with is a woman named Karuna, and she used to be a designer, and she has some of the most detailed, beautiful slides, has such an eye for exactness that I will never have. There are unique traits there, but she is now a researcher. She's not a designer / researcher. Again, not always the case, but tends to be the most impactful. Okay, we had some questions earlier about kind of working within the product cycle. What is the design process? Always growing, always circular, but overall, we're moving from this kind of learning, building, refining, concept planning, and back again. What do we say there? Learning, what should this be? What could this be? What could we build out? And you can think of this for literally anything. What could make a good summer camp? What could make a better premium product for Lyft? What could make a better book finding experience? You then start to build, start to pull things apart, and then get closer and closer to where you want to be, right? You start with the big bullseye and you're getting closer to the center. You put that bullseye somewhere, see how well it works, and maybe it does. Maybe people hit the target, maybe you didn't, and then you can kind of grow and contract within that, and then keep going with planning until the next cycle of development, other research insights that you're getting. The research and product side of this, however, a little bit more complicated because you are always balancing within that overall product cycle. Now, what do I mean by product cycle? Your PM is your product person, your project manager. For people that are brand new, you have both a PGM and a PM. PM, product manager, is the one you're going to be working with the most. PGM, program managers, similar title, actually totally different role. They're often like in control of things like systems like recruiting or developing a customer service output, but a little bit more narrow into their own space. I don't know who named them. This was really confusing for me at the beginning of my career, so I'm calling it out here. So PMs and research. The PMs are also trying to discover and see what they need to build, almost always with a very, very, very strong business sense of things, right? They don't necessarily know what the user is doing. In some companies, product is actually kept completely separate from research. I do not agree with that approach personally, but it's a thing. It exists in the world. But what are the opportunities from the business side? What are the opportunities in the world? And this could be like, we need to rent more cars. The researcher, on the other hand, is looking at that foundational to say, well, what do we understand about that problem? What do we understand about that space? What's the issues with rental cars? What are the issues with how rental cars are run today? How could we make that better? Where are we missing the buck? Are there any groups that might be underserved, like parents who have harder times getting around because they've got like kids screaming, or pet owners, things like that? So translating that from business, rent more cars, to what's going on with the user. With product, you're then going to get into this defined space. Again, always narrowing, generally from the business sense. They do love business. If you get a good PM, by the way, who's really driven by research, hold on to that person tight. They're not terribly uncommon, but they're not super common either. But this is also when you're going to move into generative research. So if they say, look, we need a way for people to bookmark cars, and you're like, okay, cool. Booking is what we're going after. You're going to start generating ideas, generating products based on booking, right? We want to make it easier to do it in an app. Maybe we want to book on smartwatches or via voice. What are the booking opportunities that you can kind of drive within that? You're then going to develop something called a PRD, product review document. This is just laying out everything that's going to be done. One of the biggest things you can do in your own career is get your hands in these, especially junior folks tend not to do this. Be annoying. Like, you've worked hard to get where you are. Push in a lot of comments, questions, opportunities in that PRD, and make sure your research is represented so you can show clear impact, but you can also get a lot out of it. Then we're going to get into refine and launch, which is like, what are we actually doing? Again, getting narrower, and you'll be switching into evaluative research. So what is it going to be? Now, why do we want to move on this cycle? Let's say you do your foundational, you're great. The missing part with rental cars is the ability to book on a smartwatch. I don't know why I keep tapping my wrist. I am like the ultimate Luddite and only use non-digital watches. But let's pretend. If you then say, oh, you know what, in the evaluative stage, what we want to do actually is on pinky rings. Pinky ring booking is the way to do it. That very well may be. You're too late in the process. If you go back without aligning with product, you're going to lose your stakeholders. They're not going to stick with you. So always keeping an eye on where they are so that your work is going to be leveraged. Because here's the thing, you are the voice of the user as the researcher, and hopefully a bit as the designer as well. But if you lose pace with that, product is going to keep moving, right? They still have their own goals that if you're not aligned with, they might launch without you. And there have been cases where this has been really, really negative. So keep an eye on where they are. Cool. Any questions on the cycle? We'll get into this a little bit later too. Okay. Types of UXRs. There's 3 types in general. I don't know why I held up 2 at first. 3 types. Qualitative. A lot of UXRs are qualitative. These are the folks that are really having those interviews, asking all those why questions. You know you are at dinner at a qualitative UXR because they are going to ask you about every little thing. Why did you get Pepsi with that instead of Coke? I noticed you got Coke last week. They are great trip planners, by the way, in general, but they're going to ask you a lot of questions. Mixed method tends to be the folks that are using a little bit of everything. They can flex into quant, they can flex into qual. They might not be as strong in either as qualitative and quantitative methods, depending on the UXR, but they really are driven by the question itself, driven by the business need in which one they're going to do or how they're going to bring them together. And the quantitative folks tend to be very, very data heavy, plus surveys. They'll use some other methods like eye tracking that we'll talk about, but very data heavy. They do differ from something called a data scientist, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Yes, AJ, these slides are going to be shared out. This is not my image though, so if you steal it, the author of it is in the bottom. I do want to call something out, and I'm actually working on a paper about this. All UXRs are awesome. One of the things I'm seeing that I really, really hate right now is articles coming out that are like, the future of research is mixed methods. You are mixed methods or you are nothing. That is abjectly untrue. There is so much space in the field for qualitative researchers. There's so much space in the field for quantitative researchers. They each bring very unique value in how they work with teams, how they think about data, how they solve problems, the rate at which they can do those things. There are certainly really great benefits to having a mixed methods researcher. And if you are the only researcher at a company, it's probably going to serve you to be mixed methods. It's really hard to be the only researcher at a company, by the way, so I don't necessarily recommend it unless you really like a challenge. But please, if you are a qualitative researcher and you're like, do I have to do this to succeed? No, there are roles for you at every single company, including the biggest ones in the world and including startups. So be qualitative. I love qualitative research. And those articles are BS. Just ignore them. Okay, what is the difference though? This is a heavy slide. Let's focus on the yellow. This is going to set us up for later. And again, these slides are being shared out. Qualitative user researcher has to have expertise in multiple qualitative research methods. Now, I'm going to call something out really quickly. And I know some of this, again, for folks that have been in the field is a little basic. If you want an entry-level job, that tends to be 3 methods: usability, concept testing, something else, diary study, card sort, doesn't matter. 3. I see these resumes sometimes that are just like filled with methods and you feel like you have to learn every single thing. If you are just starting out, that is the number that Google is looking for. As you continue to get higher and higher, you need to know more methods. At least at first, being competent, really, really good at a few is perfect. Do not stress out about it too much. These folks generally do not have quant methods. Now, they may be able to do a few surveys. They might have done a few surveys in the past or questionnaires in the past, but they are not survey experts. And if they're using statistics, they're probably using descriptive statistics. What are descriptive statistics? When you say things are like 23% of people said X, 12% of people said Y. You're not doing any analyses, you're just reporting out the data. I do want to flag, if that is the only version of surveys you have done, you are a qualitative researcher. Qualitative researchers are amazing. You are a qualitative researcher, and that is great. Don't write on your resume that you're mixed methods. You're going to get awful questions in your interviews that are like, what's p-value? What's r-squared value? And it's not going to go the way that you want it to. So just be honest. I love qualitative researchers. And I've had this happen a few times this year where I've interviewed folks for mixed methods and they were clearly qual, and I actually would have loved to bring them on for qual, but they were applying as a mixed methods researcher. So be careful there. Imran, it's not 3 specific methods, just have 3, make sure one of them is usability. The idea here is you just need 3 methods. I think one of the big things I hear is people are like, I feel like I need to know 10 just to get my first job. You do not. Be good at 3. Make sure one of them is usability. It's really an easy one. Don't stress about it. Okay, quant. Quant is actually less common, I would say. They need multiple expertise in multiple quant methods, including some really, really advanced statistics. They're looking at things like SEM, HLM, max diff, all sorts of stuff, and they should actually be able to code them. So if you can do a max diff in Qualtrics, same. But that doesn't mean we're quant researchers. You should really have a very strong understanding of the statistics behind it. They will also have expertise in coding, often in things like Python, but something that they're actually coding in, and some sort of statistics program. R is still my favorite, especially if you're going after startups, because it is still free. JASP as well is pretty good, also free, but just something that you're coding in. It shouldn't be Excel, and it shouldn't be relying on something like Qualtrics. They also have expertise in non-survey methods. These are things like eye tracking, again, more advanced statistics. Quant methods, very, very, very heavy in the data. Not my comfort area, to be totally frank, but cool roles. Cherry will get into the qual-quant data science, so there's some awesome papers about that as well. So what is mixed methods? Mixed methods have multiple qualitative and multiple quantitative methods. In terms of qualitative skills, not all that different than qualitative researchers, though they probably use them a little bit differently, have different expertise areas. Mixed methods folks must be able to survey. This is the most common piece we have, but they also have to have advanced statistics skills. So t-test, ANOVA, GLM, generalized linear model, be able to really get into those. How do we actually explain things with the data more than just descriptive statistics? Often we're also looking for one more expertise beyond surveys. Might be tree testing, it might be eye tracking, it really doesn't matter which, but one more in addition to that. So I know this is a heavy slide, so we'll keep moving on that. Okay, what does this mean? Qualitative folks almost always really focusing on the why. Why do they feel this way? Why did this thing not work? What could be better? Really, really deeply understanding what's motivating people and how they're making their decisions. One of the reasons I absolutely love qualitative researchers, there are so many pieces of bias that enter into how we do research. Let's just take surveys, for example. If we look at a classic survey method, there's this guy named Don Dillman, he's still working, I think he's at Cornell. And he was like, the best way to send out a survey is 5 times. You're gonna tell people, you're gonna send them a letter that says the survey is coming with a link to take it online. You're then gonna send them a survey. They're then gonna send them a postcard that reminds them that you sent them the survey. You're then gonna send them the survey again. And then you're either gonna send them a postcard or you're gonna call them. So 5 separate methods. What do you think we do in tech? We send you it once and we hope, and that's it. It's really not great. Now, some companies do a little bit more, but in general, that's what you're going to be limiting to. So it's always bias. There's a lot of work you can do to mitigate that, but there's a lot of bias. So that what might not always be perfect. Where qualitative, if you can dig enough of that why, you can get a lot of representativeness, decide on next steps in a little bit more equitable way. Quant really getting at that what, right? How do people feel? How are those things related? Really looking at that what. They should be able to say, this is going to affect this many of our users. This is the potential specific amount of money we could gain or lose from taking this action. Very aligned with engineering, which is one of the reasons quant folks can be so effective, is they talk the same language. But I think we know as researchers that talking the same language is not necessarily the best way to go forward. Let's open that Tower of Babel. Let's start talking to each other. And finally, mixed methods. So you're like, oh, they're the what and the why. Kind of. Really where mixed methods shines is something called triangulation. So triangulation is when things are starting to come together, where I can say, I'm really enjoying Antonio's interactions with me, by the way. I don't know if you don't have his video also up, you should do so. But you're bringing that together to really tell a more whole picture, right? A little bit of the why, a little bit of the what, a little bit of magic brings it all together. And we'll talk about that more as we move forward. Now, 2 things here. Mixed methods researcher versus mixed methods research. The mixed methods researcher has both qualitative and quantitative expertise. They are comfortable with descriptive and inferential statistics. That's the like ANOVA, things like that. They combine multiple pieces of data to tell a bigger story, but not every project they do is mixed methods, right? If I'm answering the same question with multiple ways, surprise, surprise, you're not going to do it every time. It takes a lot of time. Mixed methods research is the ability to bring those together. So that triangulation piece. But again, you're not always going to do every single time use both of them. A lot of the research I do is straight qual or straight quant. There's a lot of great ones. Nielsen Norman is a great one, though I have heard that Norman is a racist. So I'm going to look for a better opportunity there. Mixed methods UXR, however, is not just writing surveys. This is one of the big mistakes that we're seeing a lot of, so be careful there. It's not always the best approach. There are many times that you want to move faster that you just don't need both. It is powerful. It is not perfectly so. It's not always best. And it is not inherently better. I know I've hammered on this point, but please, qualitative researchers especially, you're amazing. I love you guys. Be qualitative. There is nothing inherently better about mixed methods, so keep moving on it. Now, what are some of the things they're going to be doing? And we'll talk about these a little bit more before we go into the activity. Qualitative folks, mixed methods are looking at things like interviews, intercepts, diary studies, heuristic analyses. That's something I actually haven't done in a long time, but it's a great one to know. Usability testing, qualitative card sorting, and participatory design. The quant folks are doing things like surveys, of course, more advanced statistical methods, A/B testing, which is just like throwing two things in the world and seeing which one performs better. Quantitative usability testing, quantitative card sorting, tree testing, and eye tracking. And we'll talk about each of these a little bit more. But somewhere in the middle, when we're combining both of them, again, is where mixed methods comes into play. A couple of overall differences. Qualitative folks tend to be working with pretty small sample sizes. Now, if you're an academic, you might be working with larger ones. Pleasant or unpleasant surprise, you won't be doing that once you are in industry. You're probably working with sizes of like 6 to 8, sometimes up to 12, but probably rarely so. Quant working with really, really big data sets, close to what data science is doing. Mixed methods really all over the middle, depending on what's needed. Qualitative tends to be very narrative driven, quantitative, very data driven. Mixed methods, more on the narrative end of that, but again, always a bigger scope in the middle. And qualitative tends to be interventional, which means I am going into your life and interacting. This is not always the case. There's a little bit over here on the far right. And these are things like ethnographies where you just go and watch, but you're interacting, you're doing something between them. Observational on the quantitative end, which is just like I'm looking at the data, I'm seeing what's going on, common with data science as well. Of course, they might be doing surveys, which are more in that middle space as well, mixed in the middle. Apparently, there is a more user-friendly version of R called Orange. But don't you love working with R and just crying a little bit every time? Counterpoint. Now, somebody asked a great question, which is like, well, what about data science? What about CMI? Or what about data science? CMI, by the way, consumer market insights, very similar to quantitative UXR, just looking at marketing. They also leverage mixed methods, though tend to be more on the quantitative end, really focusing on things that market fit. They do interact with the user directly. They'll ask surveys, they'll ask questions. Data science, almost entirely observational at most companies. They're using the data like the logs. So anytime you touch on something online, you tap on it, people know what you're doing and can look and say, did you book that rental car? Did you email? Whatever else. We can see what those behaviors are and we can learn a lot from them. They tend to leverage programming, machine learning, and really high level nerdy stats to understand what's happening. But they rarely interact with the user, at least at most companies. There's always exceptions here, but they're almost always just looking at the data. How many people completed a task? How did adding a new experimentation thing change how people completed or did the task? And how does that then affect our budget? Okay, now what are some of these methods? I'm keeping an eye on the time. Well, unsurprisingly to anybody who's heard me talk, we're going to go over a little bit. If you can't stick around, I am sad, but please listen to the recording. So mixed methods UXRs are just regular UXRs. Yes, it's the same methods. There's just a few more of them that you tend to know for the most part. But mixed methods UXR are kind of the acrobat. They can bend, they can move into different spaces as they need. You need qual, you need quant, and you need another quant method. So you see a survey and then one more quant method. Make sure if you're applying for these roles that you have all three of those. That other quant method might just be one more advanced statistics, might be A/B testing, it might be eye tracking, it really doesn't matter, but have a little bit more expertise there. So what are the qual methods? We won't go into this too far just because I think people tend to be more comfortable with the qualitative methods. There's lots of popular ones. Usability is the one you will definitely need. Some form of interviews, if that's moderated, if that's intercepts, doesn't matter, something there. If you're just starting out, again, 3 is plenty. Don't worry about too much. You will need surveys. They are the most common, but you still need them. It is not everything, but you need them. Now, it's 3 components. We'll talk about this a little bit more. Writing, distributing, and analyzing. You do need all 3. And they should have an understanding of single and multivariate statistics. If you can determine sample size, power analysis, there's a lot of pieces that go into this. But surveys is definitely one that you will need as a mixed methods researcher. These are also great, by the way, designers, if there's anything that you're like, okay, I get what you're saying, but how many people does that affect? That's a survey question. Now, 3 pieces, design. Design is the one that a lot of folks do. And by the way, Facebook or Meta loves to ask, like, which parts of the method are you comfortable with? This is what they're talking about. You want to be able to talk to each one. Design is writing the survey, writing the questions, writing the flow, knowing when to randomize, knowing how to ask something, how to describe something, all of those pieces, making sure it then meets with the business goals as well with the user goals. It's not leading, all of that good stuff. Writing a good survey is hard. It's really, really hard. Often people forget this. Your best friend with surveys, by the way, is somebody on your team or nearby your team who has a free 20 minutes to look at your survey. Get a ton of eyes on it at this stage. There's then distribution. So that's how are you going to send it out and how are you going to mitigate bias? So if I was to send to a perfectly evenly distributed number of people a survey by mail, that old thing with the postage that none of us do anymore. The most likely person to respond are old, college-educated white men. Is that representative of your product? Probably not. Something to keep in mind. If I send out a survey by web, again, perfectly distributed, they are going to be middle-aged, less educated white women. Why? I have no idea. That's who tends to respond. So you do really want to keep that in mind. And how are you going to mitigate that bias in what you're sending it out? You can do it afterwards with post-hoc weighting. You can do it with stratification, but being able to account for how you're going to do that and make sure that your product is representative of who you want to be talking to and who you want to be representative of. Finally, analysis, inferential statistics. I'm missing a comment on ageist. Not ageist, it's just kind of how people respond. I don't know. There's some great studies on this. Again, Don Dillman is kind of the person for that. But data cleaning, making sure it's the right stuff. Data cleaning, as much as you can automate, by the way, please automate it. And I do want to call out that one of the things that comes up a lot in data cleaning right now, especially with paid samples, is abject racism. So if you are a person of color, if you are a person that is a member of a protected group, and you're like, look, I don't really want to deal with that, tag in someone else. It is totally fine to say, I need help. I need someone who doesn't face these systematic barriers to look at this data and just run and make sure I'm not looking at racist, vile BS. And that is okay. Please protect yourself. Get help there. If that needs to be a contractor, if that's someone else on your team who you can do some work swap with, think about that. But knowing how to clean the data, both in terms of just like people entering random things, but looking for that kind of poor responses. Also includes post-hoc weighting, which is when you say, okay, I had way too many of this group respond. How do I weight the data so that it's more representative of my population? What do I mean by population? Whatever your study goal is. So if you really do specifically want to know how older white men respond, you can weight to that end. But if you say, I want to know all the Lyft users, it should be representative of your entire Lyft population. If you work at a company that is international, always keep this in mind, because are you saying all users, or are you saying your US users, or your users in India, your users in Canada, et cetera? Think about your group there. Cool. A little bit more on these methods. Surveys are great at the what question. What are users' overall needs, customer requirements, satisfaction? really good at monitoring change over time. So not very complex surveys that go out all the time and just see, is something going differently? You're really limited. You can only survey what you can ask. So if it turns out the #1 blocker to using your product was the fact that your interface was a weird green color, for whatever reason, nobody liked your weird green color, and you don't ask about that, you're never going to know. So it's limited in that way. Qualitative is not. And the why is harder to get at. Again, you only get what you ask. You can use them at any time. Different survey approaches to have different strengths at different points within the product cycle. I always recommend using qualitative research first, again, so you can make sure you're asking about the right things. There's 2 kinds of usability. We forget this all the time. Qualitative is the most common. Those are the interviews we do to say, hey, walk me through this product. How is this working? But there's also quantitative usability, where you can have a lot of people use something and record specific metrics, like how long did it take? Were they successful or not? And you can add additional survey components to this that look at things like happiness, desirability, satisfaction, etc. Different modes. Again, you're going to miss some of that why. So if there's a mental model that's preventing people from using that work, it's a little bit harder here. But both of these exist. Both of them are totally valid. Really good at understanding how things work that are live in the world. Tends to be really, really fast. I've done like multiple usability cycles on slightly adapted versions of a product, as many as like 3 in a week. I don't recommend that. It's not ideal, but you can totally do it. They tend to be very focused in scope, however. And when we say saturation, right? Oh, it works for everybody. Be really careful who saturation is. Let's say hypothetically, you ran something for 100 people and you're like, this works. I have insane saturation. Everybody was able to do it, but you didn't test with blind people, and blind people can't use it. You did not hit saturation with all Americans. You hit saturation with Americans who do not have accessibility issues. So be really careful when you say saturation. Who do I have saturation with? And is that representative of my users? We make these kind of trade-offs all the time. This is not to say every single time you do usability, you should be looking at every accessibility issue in the US. You should always be thinking about it. Justin said, could you say more about sequencing? Why would it be an instance you wouldn't begin with qual? Time. So sometimes you just need to get something to unblock, or you feel like you actually have a really good sense of what's going on from other previous research that might not be directly related. In an ideal world, though, you're doing some sort of qual before quant, again, to scope it down. Quantitative user researchers, however, never do qual. So there are always kind of trade-offs and opportunities with each. Cool. Understanding choice. Max diff and conjoint are the big ones here. These are quantitative. They allow you to quantify preference. Max diff is way easier. Recommend it. It shows the overall preference of things in these groupings. So you'll take roughly 5 things and say, what's your favorite and your least favorite? What's really nice about this is you can actually see the relative ranking all the way down. You get a lot more detail in that way. Conjoint then adds money to the equation. So you can say, like, what do they actually want? And how much will they pay for it? What are they actually going to do about it? This is really great because, again, YouTube Premium, I really want to get rid of ads. Okay, how much are you willing to pay? Is it $10 a month? Is it 14? That's where Conjoint can get at that and say, how much are you actually willing to make this problem go away? Conjoint is much harder. A lot of ways to do conjoint wrong, so probably leave that up to your quant folks. But if you want to take that on, I don't know. I love a challenge. Take it on. Understanding choice is great for understanding kind of how the real world people will use. There's a strong ability to show the cost and risk of a given thing. So if I do this, how much is it going to benefit me? If I don't do this, how much is the risk adding? The method is highly subject to how well the survey taker is paying attention. If they are not paying attention and are tapping randomly, it can be really hard to catch that in data cleaning, and it can be a little bit weird to look at, and this data tends to be hard to analyze. This is later in the product cycle, almost never foundational, because you have to have some ideas to test, but it can be at different points. Okay, desirability studies. Again, 2 versions of this. This is one qualitative method, by the way, that I don't see anyone using anymore, and it's a really fun one. So if you just want to play with a new method, do a desirability study. You tend to present a subject with a whole bunch of reaction cards, which are just like emotions on a card. There are set ones, but you can also make your own. That might be more a smaller number. I think the set is like 72, but they are free. You can print them out or put them in a Miro board. And you literally say, pick the ones that represent how you feel about this new flow, about this new product. And it's a great way to really add some color to what's going on. So let's say people are frustrated, but they're like, yeah, I'm still really happy about the product. That might give you a sense of how hard they're going to be to work through those issues that they're having and what those opportunities are. With a survey, you can actually ask that directly with like satisfaction questions, desirability, but you do want to be specific, right? How do you like the product? Interesting for baseline, but not very actionable. You want to ask like specifically visual appeal or ease of use, things like that. You can also do things with eye monitoring. If you have access to eye tracking software, you can see like when did people's eyes get bigger or smaller or get distracted more and get a lot of emotion out of that. There's some really cool papers in that space if you're interested in that method. These tend to be great for understanding emotional reaction. They're best when visual designs exist, and they're really effective against a very broad approach of things and emotions, right? Some of these are literally like slimy or gross. And it's really interesting if your product, somebody's like, oh, that feels slimy. It gives you a lot of insight in how that thing is coming across. They're highly affected by response bias though, and by culture, right? How we feel about things is very affected by our culture. How we use words is affected by our culture. So something to keep in mind. And you do need high fidelity mocks. So definitely not ideal for foundational, but great as you get up. Eye tracking, super fun one, ridiculously expensive. So if you're not at one of the big three, it's unlikely that you have access to these, but push for it. They're really fun. And you can actually see like, what are people looking at? How long are they looking at it? What's going on when they're looking at it? Things like that. Lots of high fidelity data here. However, ridiculously expensive. Sample size is actually really difficult. There's within subjects and between subjects comes into play here for the quant folks. You still need to test this if you really want quantitative eye tracking data with a lot of people, which can take a lot of time. Also, there are some biases within this. I believe it's like people with an astigmatism can't use eye tracking, or if they have a lazy eye, they can't use eye tracking. So you are kind of inherently pulling out some of your users, but a really cool method if you have it. It's always later in the process, however, something has to exist for them to look at. Finally, while I'm a little exhausted, these methods are not. There are many, many, many more methods. A lot of different places are linked through here. Google's your friend here. There's very few people that are going on to like lie about these methods, but definitely a lot to learn, but we're gonna leave you with those tonight. So what is the unique value of a mixed methods researcher? Because right, qualitative exists, quantitative exists, both are successful, both are awesome. It's our ability to triangulate and bring things together. What do we mean by triangulation? This actually is a term that originally came from mapping. So if I am camping, but I'm a little bit lost, I can take out my compass and look at a peak in the distance and be like, okay, it's that way. Cool, a little haystack is that way. But then I am somewhere on that line. And that's the same as saying like, people want to pay less for YouTube Premium. People want fewer ads, right? Okay, what am I gonna do with that? What else can I know about that? I'm somewhere there. That's not great. Like if I have a broken leg, the search party is not going to be able to find me somewhere on that miles and miles long line. So if I can then go look at another peak, they get a better and better idea of where I am. And the more data points you add, the more likely they are to be able to find me. And it comes together in a little triangulation. So you're always bringing things together to say, let's get closer and closer to the truth. Triangulation. Now, this is something we do a lot and not always in the research sense. For example, your car's making a clunking noise. You're like, okay, I hear it. That's one data point. You might Google it. You might ask your uncle or your aunt who knows a lot about cars. That's another data point. You're not ready to act yet. And then maybe you go to a mechanic, but you're going to balance those together, right? You're not necessarily just going to listen to the mechanic because they might be overcharging you, or your uncle who might be telling you not to worry about something you should be worrying about. And you might even be hearing it wrong. So you're going to get closer and closer to the truth. And as with cherry pits, higher confidence as you go. So, okay, my uncle says it's bad. The mechanic says it's bad. I understand why it's $500, right? Like mechanic says it's bad, my uncle says it's no big deal, and you're like, oh God, what do I do next? You probably go talk to another mechanic and continue to triangulate data until you get something that makes sense. Okay. Fix the car in the end. Now, with mixed methods, it means that we're using some sort of quant, some sort of qual, something else that brings it together, which might be past business knowledge, past research, etc. This could be something like doing a survey, doing an interview, and then sprinting with your team, right? So I do these interviews, I get a good sense, I test it at scale, and then I bring my team together to create that product decision. It could also be looking at like how desirable is the thing? Can it be used? And then understanding their choice analysis, right? Okay, cool, it's usable and they want it, but how much will they pay for it? Bringing those pieces together to really inform that product next steps. Now, it's not always 3 methods. It could be 2, it could be 10. It could be the same method done over and over again in iterative fashion if you really needed to learn more from that one method. The other data points might not be your own. It might be from data science, it might be from another UXR, consumer market insights, marketing, past research, all sorts of things. Competitive sourcing is another big one. How is somebody else doing this or reacting to this? But some of the big things we see here in common groupings are like analytics and customer support logs. People are reporting more and more problems, and we're hearing about it in customer support. That problem seems to be why. Cool, that's what we should focus on. Quantitative usability and qualitative concept testing, right? Okay, people can use it at scale, but it's not getting a lot of, not a lot of people actually using it in product. Let's do some interviews, let's do some concept testing to see if it actually is meeting where it needs to be. Surveys and interviews, these are the most common. Be ready to talk about both of these in an interview, by the way, but it's not just surveys. Surveys are cool, they're not everything. They also might just be like intercoder reliability, right? Heuristic analysis, having 3 people to come in and agree. Lots of different pairings here. Do not need to memorize these all. These are all top of the hat when I wrote these. So, but just think there's a lot of different ways to get closer and closer to the truth. Now, what's the good about this? It does decrease risk. It decreases unexpected surprises because you thought about more of the things. It gives you a ton of data, which is a positive and a negative. And you can bring in a lot of different folks on your team. If you have data science brought in and your quant person brought in and your business person brought in, you're probably all going to agree on next steps pretty effectively, which is rad. Now, bad, it takes a lot of time. It might not always have time to do multiple methods. You might not have time to truly triangulate. It slows down your overall process. It can be too much, right? It can be too much data. It can be too much time. It can be too much everything that you just get overwhelmed by it. And it may require too many folks on the team where you're like, I don't have the data science skills and I need that other person. And then you're again slowed down or blocked by this other person. So it's not always great. Only do it when you really need it, right? If it's a pretty low risk decision and you're like, I'm pretty confident in my usability results, move forward on usability. A mixed methods researcher is not always using mixed methods. So how do I know what to triangulate? A lot of that does come back to the business impact. In an ideal world, what are we trying to pull off? What do we want to do? What's going to block us from getting there? And if I tell someone the story of this product, what narrative doesn't make sense? Now, this is an exercise I push people to all the time. If you have access to children's books, read it. The simpler, the better. Why do I have this? I have nephews. They've never read this book here, but one day, they're not big readers. What's the thing about a children's book? They don't change clothes unless they absolutely have to. Winnie the Pooh, red shirt. If he changes his shirt, it's about the story. You should be able to tell the very, very simple story of your product, of your decision, such that anyone could understand it inside or out of the company. And that is the same for your portfolio presentations, your interviews, anything else. If you're like, there's something missing in the story, right? He fought the dragon, but like, what happened to the dragon? What do I do next? There's something missing in the data. Simplify, simplify, simplify. If you can't simplify, you're probably missing something important. Go read a children's book. This is a great one, by the way. Jamberry. It's about a boy who likes jam. Now, one of the big things here is we actually want to start to try this. So if you're still here, thank you. Thank you for being here. But we're going to do an exercise. And you're going to put this together and put together your own research and design plan. I see you designers. I want you participating. There is an amazing workshop that somebody put together on Mural, because the people that run SDXD are just amazing. A couple of you in this room have worked with me in the past. I'm not like the most artistic, so I'm really excited about that. You will not make a copy of the worksheet because you will have a mural board, which Antonio has just dropped into the chat. You will have a prompt, whichever is the number of your breakout room is your prompt. So if you are breakout room 3, you are prompt 3. If you really like prompt 8, please stick with prompt 3, unless for any very, very intense reason you feel like you were drawn to prompt 8. You'll have about 10 minutes to develop your research and design iterative plans, so all the way throughout. Things that you want to think about: what methods will you use? When will you use them? Who are your users? How will design be involved? How will product be involved? What are they adding to it? What's success at the end of this? What decisions are you hoping to make, and how are you going to make sure you get to success? What risks exist, and how are you going to address them, or choose not to address them? There are definitely times that we say there's a risk, but it's not that big, we're not going to do anything about it. At the end of this, 2 teams are going to present for feedback. Now, why are we doing this? 1, because I really want you to think more about these methods. 2, the interview process for UX sucks. I'm sorry, we're working on making it better. At some companies, it's hard, but one of the big things you're going to be asked a lot is to do these mock scenarios where you on the spot are going to develop a research plan. It will not be in this high fidelity, but thinking about how would you make a research plan, how would you develop, how would you adapt, a really, really, really good approach to have, a good skill to have in your back pocket. Now, again, there's a board that's going to make this a lot prettier, but a version of this that might exist, and I put this together as a mock, is how might we develop a product that makes golfing better with dogs? Okay, Jeremy loves to golf every Saturday, but hates leaving his pup, Chuck, behind. Golf seems to be a natural fit, lots of walking, which is Chuck's favorite thing. They get to be outdoors, and it prevents Chuck from destroying anything in the house. Jeremy wants to develop a way to safely golf with Chuck at his local green. In 3 months, he's planning on pitching to Bark Tank. Can you tell I don't golf, by the way? So narrow scope. Product that makes golfing easier with dogs could be any number of things. How do we break that down? We've got Chuck's needs, Chuck is the dog, and Jeremy's needs of that interaction. We might want to consider safety. What are the limits that we're going to do, and what is success? And how are we going to meet those needs? In 3 months, you just need to make something rough. What of these are you going to address? What is the minimum viable product? Another phrase that I absolutely hated when I started my career in UX, MVP. What does everyone think of? Most valuable player. Why? Because that's what it means. Why did UX make that mean minimum viable product? Not a clue, but that's what it means in UX. As much as you can, drill that into your head, because it's going to be the most confusing year of your life if you're like, why is the simplest version of this called the best? It's because it means minimum viable product. So something that this might look at, in mine, I said for the discovery and define, I want to interview some dog owners who golf. What do they need? What do they want to do? I will also probably have to interview golf managers, right? Is this okay? What are the safety concerns? What are the legal concerns? And then doing intercepts with people who golf but maybe don't have dogs, right? How would you feel about this? What are you concerned about? What's the opportunity here? Really shaping out that whole space. Whoop. That went the wrong direction. Defining, I've said, okay, I've got a sense of what the limits are, what could be built and what couldn't be. I could do a survey to really look more specifically at scale. What are the issues? What are the opportunity? And then also look at analytics data with my data scientist. How many club members have dogs? How might additional dogs membership, like sales, actually help things out? What are the maintenance costs associated with this? I could also be looking at things like a journey map of developing golfing with your dog, doing a sprint to bring everyone in, design more there, CMI, market insights, to look at what problems or opportunities, and the design could start to actually sketch things out with these safety constraints in mind. Getting into refine, I might do concept testing, looking at these concepts of golfing dog owners. What is the business portal for the managers? What do they need to make it happen on their end? Could design and refine, start to do usability testing. And after launch, I might do intercepts to see how it's working in the real world, do a bug bash every week, see what things are coming up that are being filed, social media listening, how are people responding to this? Could do surveys, and I could do logs analysis to look at things like retention. Now, there's no perfect answer here. This is one way to think about it. And just one example, your team will put together however you think it is. Just think about what is the end to end and what do I want to end up with when I deliver in 3 months, that I can say, yes, I've thought of everything, right? Golfing with dogs, the golf balls, dogs want to chase. They're also very fast. There's a safety issue. What are some of those things that you're thinking about as you go through the process to make sure you can account for that? Antonio, I believe, is going to send us into breakout rooms. Does anyone have any questions before we move on? Cool. Okay. You will have a different person assigned who is a little bit more familiar in each group for your group to talk about. Let's break them out.
All right. I'm working on getting everyone into the breakout rooms.
As you're waiting, accept Mural's terms and conditions and put your name in for networking.
Okay.
As we wait, any other questions, drop them in the chat.
Okay, so the breakout rooms are ready. Just to give you a brief explanation, I'll get everyone into the instructions so you know you can read them, but there is a map or an index, I guess, of the workspaces at the top that will link you to your workspace, and choose, those are determined by your breakout room in Zoom. So if you're in breakout room 1, just click the pink box. There's a link at the bottom of it and it'll take you there. So I'll put you guys into breakout rooms, and we'll jump around to see that everyone's doing okay. So here we go. From 1 to 10, and I'll summon, if everybody has Mural open, I can summon everybody to see the board and present each of the group slides. So we'll start at number 1. So let me summon people.
Oh man, that can be, well, the golden can be made happen. Hold on. Okay.
Yes, if we can, James, we'll do every group.
This is perfect.
Okay, so, oh, hey.
Good boy.
Yep. All right, so group number 1, do you want to let us know what your action plan was?
Yes, my name is Katrina. I'm sorry you cannot see me. I've been using an old computer, so the camera's not working. My new computer is still fixing. Sorry about that. So our action plan, we actually use a timeline. So we have 4 different phases, and each phase will have their own deliverable or task or activity, you can say. So we divide it into, like, research kickoff, and in the execution part, we have the analysis, synthesizing, as well as the ideation workshop at the end of it. So what we did is that in the early beginning, we'll have a team formation, understand the resource needed for the project, define what is success and goal of the project, understand the scope of it, any sync with the PM, product owner, so that we can know what is the key OKR is, understand who's the stakeholder in this project, and as well as all this like timeline and budget. Once we gone through that phase, we started our research execution. So we will meet with data science and analytics to capture any drop-off metrics area, and also we have to look into internal, like, qualitative side. We interview with people. For the quantitative, we do survey as well. And then what we also look into, like, how could, well, our goal is to understand why the feature is not working. The only thing that we come up with that is that the design, the goal of this define is that maybe they have a subscription and they all drop off. So our execution is mostly focused on that. So we have usability testing afterward, and then we observe user to use the feature. And we also get a list of people who actually drop off from our sales team, and and then we also talk to, like, customer service, see if they need complain about bug fix with the technician, stuff like that. After we all get the resource executions, we start the analyzing phase. We have like chart, we're using statistical analysis, like, MATLAB, it could be SPSS, it could be anything, just, all. We also doing like video reels, we use like user quote, a fitting diagram, and all put it into a research finding presentation to present to our team and any stakeholder as well. Once we finish all that, we'll come to ideation. How do we improve it so that make it work again? So we'll involve with the designer in every phase of project. All the designer will have to, will be on, everybody on the team will continue on getting the update, going to interviews. And then we also do Scrum and then stand up as well. What we think will be a good idea is that we will have we define of a new success metric, and then how we're going to redesign the feature as well. And we'll keep like iterative with like design, and then we'll continue on with the testing as well. And at the end of the workshop, what we'll do, we'll bring in, we'll continue have a research and designer to plan for the next redesign and the next phase of the project as well. That is our action plan. Anybody have questions for our action plan? And what do you all think about the action plan too?
I like how it's more of an action plan. I don't think we got that far on our team.
You guys covered everything. I'm trying to find something to say. I'm kind of
overall,
reading through it.
It's well thought out. I think this is a very thorough take on it, especially with only about 20-25 minutes. Well done.
Thank you, everyone.
Awesome.
I love it. I do wonder, just looking at time for our next, I don't know that we're going to get through everyone. Does any group want to volunteer?
That's a good idea.
We will voluntold as well, but
I could probably present ours, even though we like barely got through the end of it. We were number 7.
I love it.
Are you guys gonna summon me there? I'm like,
Oh yeah,
well,
we'll do that.
I'm better at Miro than Miro.
Yeah.
I struggle to move around this thing. We were trying to like address some of the questions. So like we kind of went through some of the questions and maybe the methods we would use to answer them. So we figured we could kick things off with a survey, get that out and have that running to figure out like things about awareness of kombucha, interest in kombucha, all that kind of stuff, who's drinking it, that kind of stuff. And then once that survey is out and sent, we could probably do some market research to answer, like what other companies are selling kombucha, where are people buying it from store versus online. Oh, that would probably be the survey actually, where are people buying it? Yeah, I'll move that there. What variety are other companies selling, and like that kind of stuff. We'd probably also be able to do some observation to kind of learn who's buying, and then that could kick off some contextual inquiry. These arrows here are pointing to the designer because there was a question of when does design get pulled in. So designers should be hearing the market research readout, and then they should probably be involved in the contextual inquiry. That we figure we could probably pull people from observation to do contextual inquiry with, to figure out like why are they buying kombucha, when do they typically drink kombucha. Oh yeah, I don't think I went over what our prompt was. That's probably confusing people. What was our prompt? Our prompt was develop a novel way to purchase kombucha online. I probably should have put that down here. Okay. So it's all about kombucha. So these are the questions that we came up with in the time. Yeah. So contextual inquiries to like pull the designers in, have them kind of understand while we're getting these questions answered, and then move into maybe a design sprint based on the learnings from those contextual inquiries, design some prototypes and usability studies, or maybe just general concept testing probably has to happen at some point earlier. And then hopefully we can figure out a good design based on all this. It doesn't really go into like all the different areas, but yeah, we got through some.
Awesome. Is there another group that wants to present? Or any comments on this, on group 7's action plan?
Our start of an action plan.
Okay. Let's zoom out to see if there's another group that maybe has something going.
Room 3 can go. We'll do this
Okay.
quickly.
Ooh, let's go.
Similar to 7, we didn't really get that far on the action plan. But ours was a pretty broad question. What we need to create to be the best rideshare app available in Canada. So we were definitely at the start of this foundational part of this explorative research, since we didn't know a lot of information. What rideshares were popular in Canada, what form of like best is, and identify what best is, if we're going through like iOS ratings or anything like that. So we thought we needed more researchers than designers at the start in terms of like UX researchers versus UI designers or anything like that. We wanted to start to understand the market space of rideshare in Canada, like who's our competition, foundational research, start with the user needs, pain points, and then figure out and organize what those pain points are with user needs or business needs. Generative research, we find that from our foundational research, CMI analytics interviews, that users are concerned about safety. That was just an assumption that we just chose. And then from then we'll just do some concept testing on the features and safety, and then refine and evaluate that through usability testing from prototypes. So it doesn't have to go to development. Maybe we can do like paper prototypes or like a clickable like InVision prototype or something like that. So pretty broad of a task that we had here, but I had fun doing it with our team.
Awesome. I will say this was intentionally very broad, and it does make it harder, but this is really, really common on interview questions, is to just throw out these questions that could go a million different ways. And they're testing your ability to deal with ambiguity, which you guys did really well, but also how to just bring clarity. So scoping this down is one way to think about it. You kind of got that with starting understanding the research. But in an interview, you might actually specifically want to say, okay, well, what does it mean to be the best? And what does it mean Canada? Like Canada itself is huge. Why Canada? Is this a general thing? Okay, I'm going to assume it's all of Canada. Then maybe I want to actually say the hardest part is rideshare in the Yukon in winter. And that's what I'm going to focus on. So great work here. In an interview, think about ways that you can scope it down for yourself and really limit it so that it doesn't feel so big. And if you're like, yeah, but it could go a million different ways. Yes, it could go 1,000,001 different ways. And that's kind of the fun of it. And that's also the challenge of it. But great work here.
So
With the interview, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask a quick follow-up to that. So would it be appropriate to, in that sense, kind of propose like, okay, let's narrow it down and let's just say the scenario is X.
Totally. Yeah. So often you want to ask questions back at first, like, well, okay, where in Canada? And they might say major cities, and that inherently you've narrowed it down. Then you can be like, well, is it actually different than the US? That's what I'm going to look at. But we're never looking for the perfect solution, is the secret sauce there. There is no right answer. These are inherently difficult questions and weird questions. We're just looking for the way that you think. And it's easier to think the more you constrain yourself to some extent.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think we were trying to focus on like that best part of just being like, what does that mean? And maybe in the context of a different country, now that you're saying that, it also might mean different things.
It might, and like you can totally focus on that too. You're like best in Canada. Well, I know that satisfaction ratings are different between different countries. I know that concerns might be different culturally. So maybe I'll focus there. But this is a great solution as well. It's just harder the bigger it is. So if you can box yourself in a little bit, it makes it a little bit easier. But great work on it. Cool. Any other questions on this? I think it's 8 o'clock, so we'll let people go. I think East Coast folks are real late now. Definitely. Yeah, please.
Yeah, so like you say action plan. What about group doing, the action plan is like a timeline? Is that like completely out of the scope, or should we just focus on the action plan of the research execution part?
Both are good. In this case, we're pushing more of that longer action plan specifically to make sure design and product felt involved. In an interview, it'll be a little bit narrower. You might get a question that's like, somebody came to you and wanted to know how popular this thing was, or what the potential for use was. And it'll be a little bit more specific, but you'll still have to design like what's popular, what's whatever else.
Thank you.
I also just want to respond to Tammy's comment. I have a couple of people that I mentor regularly, like Tammy. There's like 3 of those. Most of them I only meet with once or twice. But if you need a very specific mentor, if we're a good match, let's talk. Cool. Any other questions? And I can stick around. I know people need to drop, but I'm happy to answer more questions. You can also reach out on LinkedIn. I also think there's like opportunity if you do want to just socialize with others to hang out, I believe. Antonio,
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, there is. So yeah, we could transition into just chatting, and we could either do breakout rooms or just maybe we all take turns on muting ourselves. Yeah. And thanks everyone for coming. This was awesome. Thanks for sticking around for the workshop. There's a lot of good stuff there. It was fun seeing everyone's cursors like jump around. And I also had fun like jumping from group to group. And yeah, thanks Zoe for putting it together. It's an amazing workshop. So yeah, okay, let's I'm gonna stop
Steve,
sharing.
to that question, 3 to 1, you're almost, if there's going to be more of one or the other, it's always going to be designers. It's a little bit easier to prove the value of design because somebody has to build the thing that goes into the app. If you've ever been in a position where you had 3 researchers and 1 designer, please let me know. I've never heard of that. I think it could be really cool, especially early stage, but I've never heard of that. Some companies do end up with things like 10 to 1, but you're only going to be really doing iterative research at that point, which not my favorite.
And yeah, feel free. I think